What's up y'all, I'm Murren and I'm Modman. In this series I'll tell you all I know about modding the famous anime game, so hopefully you can make your own mod soon. If you haven't, I recommend watching previous episodes where I explain some stuff that I will talk about later in this episode. Anyways, this episode is going to be about weapon porting, and I'll divide it in 3 parts. The first part will be the simple category of weapon ports. The second part will be the a little bit more difficult category of weapon ports. And the last one is the category of very weird weapon ports, mostly, that require more case-specific information. So let's get right into it. I want to stress that if you port someone else's mod, that you don't redistribute or re-upload that without permission from the original creator. Otherwise, it's pretty much stealing someone else's mod, which wouldn't be much appreciated by anyone in the community, pretty much. So just make sure that you respect the original creator of the mod if you port it, and maybe just use the port for your own use. In part 1 of this video, I'll talk about the simplest porting parts, which is swords, claymores, and polearms that are not in the prototype series. The prototype series being the prototype Starkleader, prototype whatever. Like the forgeable weapons, those cannot be ported with this manner, and I'll explain later why. But besides that, you can use this method to port anything. So other people's mods, your own mods, vanilla weapons, merged mods, transparent mods, all of that just works. So let's talk about how we actually do this porting. You need 2 things. You need the actual mod of what that you want to port, and you need a hash.json of the weapon that you want to port to. The hash.json file can be found in the raw dumps of the weapon, and you can find these in the link in the description again, which I mentioned in other videos as well. So let's get into how you actually do the porting. To actually port the weapon, let's look at the 2 things we need. So on the right here, I have the mod that I actually want to port, and on the left, I have the repository. So I want to port it to the Favonius sword, which is a 4-star, not a bow actually, a 4-star sword. So I can find that right here. And let's see here, Favonius sword. There should be a hash.json file, and it looks like a bunch of gibberish basically. There's only a few things we actually need, and you can find them at the top here. So you have a draw VB and position VB, which have a bunch of numbers behind it, which probably are exactly the same. You have some random other things with empty quotation marks after them, and an IB value, which has another weird string of random characters. These strings of characters are hashes, basically indicating a specific object, and the mod needs them to know what they actually have to overwrite. So if you're looking at a hash.json and you see that the text cohort or blend.vb is actually filled in, like has something behind it, then unfortunately that is one of the weapons that cannot be ported with this simple method. So you will have to wait for part 2 in this video where I will explain that. So on the other hand, we have the mod that we want to port, and fortunately for us, we don't need to do anything with the names, or if it is a merge mod, you probably have a lot of folders here. You don't even need to do anything with that. You just need the ini file, either the merge.ini or in this case, just the setbootblade.ini. So let's open that right here. And the first thing you'll probably see is, well, what an ini usually looks like. Maybe down here there's a lot more things because it's, for example, merge mod, or there's some random other stuff. But the only thing that we need to look at is the stuff in the overrides section. Anything that has a column in front of it doesn't really matter, like that is ignored in that specific line. So this overrides thing doesn't matter what is there. You could put something random, just don't worry about it. However, as you can see, you have a few things in square brackets. These are called like sections, and you have values in them, which usually consist of a name, well, a key and a value of which is usually a name and something like a number or a name or whatever. So let's look at those names. You can probably see a texture override sapwood blade, or in your case, a texture override and then the name of the weapon, a texture override name IB, and a texture override name head. If you have more than just these three in the override, then usually it will be like another texture override name text coord, for example, or blend. If that is in your ini, then unfortunately it is also a mod that you can use for this porting method. So if you have your ini with these three overrides and your hash.json, then we can start actually doing the porting. What we're going to do is we're going to take the IB hash, so the string of numbers that's after IB in the hash.json, and we're just going to copy it and paste it in the hash value, well, the hash key of the IB version, and also in the head version. So the IB and the head should both be replaced with the hash that you can find here. And the position and draw VB are usually identical. You copy that one and you put it over the other, which is just the texture override name. Now we can just hit Control S in the init to save, and the porting is pretty much done already. So what you did now is basically changing what objects in game are actually manipulated by the mod. All the files that are used are unedited, we didn't touch them, so the name of these files will still be the same in the mod folder, but of course the name of the file will not match up with the name of the actual weapon anymore. So another thing to note is that now the mod will not override the original weapon anymore and only the ported weapon. If you would, for example, want the mod to be on both weapons, then you'll just have to make a copy and make sure you have an original version and a changed version. So of course we could like change the name of this folder right now, it doesn't really matter. But if we go back into the game and we press F10, then as you can see, the sapwood blade is now over the Favonius sword and the sapwood blade itself is back to normal. What we just did was making the mod that we had point to a different object, making it override a different object. This is the easiest way to pretty much port any of these mods. If it doesn't work for you right now, it's probably one of the exceptions, and that's what I'm going to talk about right now in part 2. So in this part you will actually need dumps of probably both weapons that you want, both the dump of the original mod, or well, the original weapon, and the weapon that you want to port to. However, of course, if you want to port someone else's mod, you still need this, because we're just gonna check in Blender if the mod is portable with our previous method. Otherwise, I'll explain why not and how you can possibly fix that. So let's import one of these files, and I am gonna go to my folder, let's go to weapons, and I put some specific weapons aside already, and in this case I'll talk about the catalysts. So let's just say if we check Genshin real quick, we have Baizu over here. He now has a beautiful cabbage, but let's just say we really want to use the Wind Sith on him, but we don't have any of these weapons and only the Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayers, for example. These are just examples, but in this case, if we would want to do this, then we need both the dump of the Wind Sith and of the Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers. In the case that you are porting a catalyst, you unfortunately cannot port a book to a circle or the other way around. They have very different animations, as you can see, which makes them incompatible. So you can either port a book to a book, or a circle to a circle, but not a book to a circle or the other way around. However, many circle catalysts have reasons for them not to be portable easily, and I'll show you that later. So let's check both of these weapons. So let's import the Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer, and we also want the, where is it, Winsith. So let's import both of them, and the first thing that you want to check is vertex groups. 99% of the time in my experience, I haven't seen an exception yet, these are the same for both books. If you don't understand what vertex groups or weighting is, then I recommend you watch my previous video where I perfectly explain how these work and why they are important. So I can see that my Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer has vertex group 0 to 5, and my Winsith hat also has 0 to 5. That is already a good sign. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna go, let's hide one of them, let's select the other and go into weight paint. So let's see what vertex group is weighted to what specifically. So we can see that 0 is weighted to nothing at all. That should be the case for all of the weapons you want to port. 1 is the back of the book. 2 is the separate page in the middle that always has like a different position than the rest. 3 is the end of the page. And 4 is the other side of the book. And 5, not the other side, the bottom side and the top side, my bad. So 0 empty, 1 back, 2 and 3 for the page in the middle, and 4 and 5 for the bottom and the top of the book. So let's remember that for a second and move on to the other weapon. And as you can see here, 0 is empty, 1 is the back, 2 is the page, 3 is the page, 4 is the bottom of the book, and 5 is the top of the book. This means that they are weighted like identically. We don't have to do anything fancy now. This means that any mod for one of those books will work the same on another of those books. So you can just use the previous method to port a mod or one of these books to the other. So once you checked if those vertex groups actually match up, which I think in books is always the case, you can go ahead and use way 1. However, there is a thing to it that may make it look confusing. That's a confusing sentence. So let's take this example and actually show you what is different about it. So we have the Winsith mod that I exported, which is just the vanilla Winsith, and we have the Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer. However, if you would want to like use way 1 for this and you open the Winsith ini file, you might be surprised with the more objects than there actually were in the first place. Maybe there's suddenly a vertex limit race and you don't know where to get that hash from, and there might be like a text cord and a blend or whatever. So it's a little bit more than just a simple pole arm. However, it's the same concept. So if we look at the 4-star or 3-star in this case that we want to put it over, then you can see that there are still all of these hashes, but there's some extra as well. And most of this is just matching names. So once again, in this case, if we take the winsith.ini and the hash, then of course the text coord hash goes in the text coord, the blend hash goes in the blend, the position hash goes in the position. However, as you see, the draw and position VB are different in this case. The IB we still have to do, that goes into the IB and the head. And maybe you might have realized you have the draw VB over here that we haven't used yet. That is just gonna replace the vertex limit race hash. The vertex limit race is not in every mod you will see. This is something that is, I think, a GIMI v7 thing, at least a newer thing, maybe it's, I don't know, whatever. If it's not there, then hey, no problem. If it is there, well, you now know what to use for it, which is the draw VB. And besides that, we don't have to change anything. It's just these hashes. So we can just save that. And now we can take this WinZip mod and put it in our mods folder. And if we then go to our game and press F10, and we check out our Training Tales of the Dragon Slayers, then you'll see that it is pretty much ported. Might this be the case that this is not identical, which can happen, then we need to fix something. So I luckily already prepared something there, because for both it is the same process. Bows and catalysts both have vertex groups because they both have animations. So if you would check, for example, the war bow and the sacrificial bow, then the first thing that we're gonna check is the amount of vertex groups. The sacrificial bow has 0, 1, 2, and 3, and the Favonius war bow has 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is a very important thing because it means that they don't have the same amount of vertex groups. This doesn't have to be the case, but it is very likely that these don't have similar weighting. And let's check that again by checking one of them in weights real quick. So 0 is empty like on all weapons, 1 handle, 2 bottom tip, 3 top of the bow, and 4 is the string. Seems quite like normal. However, the other bow had a vertex group less. So if we check that one out real quick, then we see that 0 suddenly isn't empty anymore. And 1, 2, and 3 have still bottom tip, top tip, and the string, but they aren't the same numbers as the other bow. Which means that porting the Favonius warbow head, for example, over the sacrificial bow would mean that the handle would be weighted to the bottom tip will be weighted to the top tip, and the top tip will be weighted to the string, and the string will be weighted to nothing. This, of course, will give a lot of problems, and luckily in this case the weight painting is still very similar. If you look between weighting of the string on the sacrificial bow and on the Favonius warbow, then you see that it's all in the center still, but it's just a different number. So let's just say that you would want to port the sacrificial bow to the Favonius warbow. Then if you're exporting it, then you would first need to make sure that the weights are the same numbers. So let's make a new weight, and it will be empty group. We will keep that for now. So the string should be 4 because it's 4 on the Favonius bow. Then the sacrificial bow should be 3. The top tip should be 3, my bad. The bottom tip should be 2, and the handle should be 1. And now we can rename the empty group to 0. Now we can click the little arrow and say sort by name, and the vertex groups are identical to each other. So exporting this change sacrificial warbow now would allow you to port it to the Favonius warbow. But in the case that you would want to port one of these weapons to the other with a mod that someone else made, you will have issues because you cannot change the vertex groups, because of course you cannot open it in Blender. And for that you will have to ask the creator of the mod to get the blend file for you, like send you the blend file, or to port it for you, because we have no way of actually fixing that ourselves in this case. So now that we understand the concept of how to port weapons that have the same weighting but different name weight groups, we can go to the topic of porting weapons that have different weight groups in general. And of course, you cannot like randomly port a bow to a sword and then expect it to have proper animations. But for example, the prototype series has animations. As you can see, it has some vertex groups and has some weight panning, which the rest of the weapons do not. So let's just say, for example, you want to port the prototype to the sacrificial or the other way around. That means you can't just go ahead and use the method I explained in part 1. So how to do that is by making use of the properties that are on the other weapon. However, we cannot do this with someone else's mod. Again, you will need the blend file for this if you really want to. So how to do that is first you gotta make sure that the vertex groups are right. Of course, the vertex groups don't really matter if you want to port the prototype archaic to the sacrificial greatsword, in this case, or the prototype to whatever. You just gotta make sure that if you don't want the tassel to be there because it will like just like stick out like this and not move at all, then delete it. However, if you don't care, or in this case you want to port it the other way around, then you don't need to delete it. You need to make sure that the vertex groups actually make sense. Because without vertex groups, the entire weapon is just not going to show up. So if we want to port the sacrificial greatsword or any other weapon to the prototype archaic, we will need to make sure that the sacrificial greatsword is weighted. So again, let's start weight comparing. And as you can see, vertex group 0 is the main weapon, and vertex group 1 and 2 do the animation of the little tassel, or whatever you call that. So to fix that, we are going to start weight pinning the sacrificial greatsword by making a group, making it 0, making it fully weight to 1. And for the rest of these attributes, you have, of course, quite some attributes over here, but you want them to keep those on the sacrificial greatsword, of course. However, you don't want to keep them on the prototype archaic. Now, you don't really need to delete anything on the prototype archaic, except for 2 things. 1, vertex groups, you don't need them, so delete 1 and 2. I guess you could keep 0 because it gets overridden anyways. And in the editing tab, we're actually just literally gonna delete the entire prototype archaic, unfortunately. Why? The prototype archaic has some attributes that the sacrificial greatsword does not. So just renaming it and adding a vertex group will give you errors. So we need to actually join it into the prototype archaic so we keep some of those attributes that the sacrificial greatsword doesn't have. Everything that the sacrificial greatsword does have does get overridden. So in the end, we will end up, if we join these together, with an object that is called prototype archaic, but looks like the sacrificial greatsword, has the attributes of the sacrificial greatsword in any way that might be relevant, but anything that is relevant for only the prototype archaic as object is still kept. So pretty much now all that we have to do is make sure that this actually becomes a mod. So we just export this, and naturally we do have to still select the prototype archaic folder, export it to the mod folder. You will get the funny message, and then in that folder, the prototype archaic mod, you could of course copy everything. However, these diffuse files aren't overridden. They are still whatever is the original texture. So we want to take everything but those texture files and just copy it. Then in here, oh, this is from when I tested some stuff out. Let's make a new folder and call it sacrificial archaic port. Okay, porting the sacrificial to the archaic. And then in here, we want to take all of these. But we still need textures, of course, so we can take them from the sacrificial greatsword, can be the exported mod, can be just the dump, and copy them over, put them in here, And now we have the proper textures, light maps, whatever, and the proper model. However, the ini still works on names for files in the end. So it will try to find a prototype archaic head diffuse.dds. Now you could try to look for anything that mentions that and fix it to match this, but if you're not really familiar with how inis work, a better way to do it is just renaming these to prototype archaic. Like select that and rename all of these so they match. And if we did that all, then the ini will just use all these files that we made so that they exactly do what we want, which is putting a different weapon on the prototype archaic. So let's put that in our mod folder. Of course, if you already have a prototype archaic mod, remove it, otherwise you get some issues. And let's refresh. And there we go. Of course, because I already have it like refined, it's purple instead of blue, but it exactly did what we want, and that is porting the sacrificial greatsword over the prototype archaic. In part 3, I'll explain the stuff that we don't yet know how to port and why not, and I will explain later in the next video how to actually do this the best that we can. However, this is very case specific, so I cannot like give one way of doing this. And as an example, I'll take some catalysts that are not books, because I have found books to be still very reliable. But if we look at catalysts, then it becomes a mess. So besides having the books as we know them, which I'll still import just to like compare them, I'll also take the Kagura's Verity. I will take the Frostbearer, I think, yeah, that's a good one. The Frostbearer, and I'll show you why this is getting quite confusing. So first off, vertex groups. As you can see, the books use 0 to 2, 0 till 5, so also 0 till 2, for very different movements than these catalysts. And this is fine, of course, in this case still, because the books just literally use a different armature. This is the main reason that we cannot port books to circle catalysts, with, of course, the exception of literally deleting any animations that were there in the first place and having them very static. But of course, that is kind of boring, not what we want. So the literal successful porting is just something that is not within our reach. However, for the bulk catalysts, there's a few different cases that we need to watch out for. For some of them, you can still port it very in the way that I explained in either 1 or 2, like part 1 or 2 of this video. However, I have found that catalysts are very unreliable in how consistent they are in animations, weight group using, and even the objects. First off is the vertex groups. As you can see, both of them have 0, 1, and 2. But to put that into perspective, if we go into weight paint, the Frostbearer has 0 empty, 1 is the center, 2 is the outer. On Kagura's Verity, that is the other way around. 0 is still empty, but 1 is the outer ring, and 2 is the center. You can still port this either just changing the hashes or using Blender to actually flip the vertex groups. Not that much impact. However, when we start looking at other catalysts that aren't this simple, then we're gonna approach some stuff that is a little bit less portable. So the first thing I'll show you is something actually in the game, because I don't have all the dumpster catalysts. Someone is actually helping me get all of them, but for now I couldn't find one. But if we take another catalyst user, why is it whatever, and we check the emerald orb, you can see that besides having just a horizontal rotation, like around its vertical axis, and the ball in the center also, I think, only rotates around that axis but faster. You also have this ring that not only rotates in the same direction but also in a vertical way around it, which adds a new vertex group, and I'm not sure how different that is in the armature, but that means that porting a mod for the Emerald Orb to another catalyst or the other way around can cause issues. Of course, 3-star weapons aren't often modded, but this is not the only example that I have. Another one I will only show in the repository because I didn't download the dump, and that is the 5-star 1000 Floating Dreams, which actually does not just have a head but also a body object. And in the hashes, as you can see, it uses both objects and has a different texture for both of them. So technically you probably could still port it using the dump and putting it all in only the body or only the head. However, that means that the armature of the 1000 Floating Dreams is also quite different, and the animations will also be different. All of this means that you cannot just use the first or the second way of porting for every single catalyst there is, and also not every single bow there is, I think. I'm not sure about that. And because of that, of course, we need to specifically for each case of having one weapon that we want to port to another and the weapon that we want to port to, for each combination of those, there might be a different way of how to get that working. And especially when it is someone else's mod, that will be a lot of complex stuff. And besides that, it takes more trial and error than anything. However, I'll still cover an example of that in my next video, as well as how to port objects that aren't weapons at all, not in the, maybe like something else from the game or an entirely different model that you maybe found on the internet, how you actually make that a weapon, because maybe you miss UVs, maybe the model that you have has used something else, maybe the attributes don't match up, and of course you could just try. But if you get errors, then maybe it is because of something you haven't thought of. And in this case, I will try to explain that in the next video. So, as always, thanks for watching. I hope you learned enough from this and that you will use it in a good way, not a bad way. And if something is confusing or you need or want more information, feel free to leave a comment or add me on Discord, and I will try to respond as fast as possible. And, well, I covered porting weapons and what issues there might be with them and how to fix most of them. And in the next video, I'll cover what I haven't covered yet in this video. So stay tuned for that. I hope to upload it as soon as possible. I still have to start on it, however, and of course I have exams coming up. So I'll see how it goes. In either way, thanks for watching, and make sure to check other videos if you want to learn more about Genshin modding. And I'll see you in the next video.